I wished for your death, but that the slave got the entire inheritance.
Have you ever placed your trust completely in someone, only to discover they were plotting against you all along? That moment when realization washes over you like ice water in your veins, when you finally see that the person you thought loyal was actually orchestrating your downfall. The pain cuts deeper than any physical wound, leaving scars that never truly heal. In the palatial mansions of 1830s New Orleans, where opulence masked cruelty and whispers carried deadly consequences, this betrayal played out in ways that would alter not just individual lives, but legacies that would echo through generations. The fragrant magnolias and sweet jasmine that perfumed the garden air couldn't mask the stench of human suffering that permeated every corner of the Belmont estate, where an aging plantation owner, his scheming second wife, and a house slave named Solomon would become entangled in a web of deception that none could escape unscathed. Have you ever wondered how far someone might go when everything they value hangs in the balance? Share in the comments if you've ever had to choose between loyalty and survival. The Belmont plantation stood as a monument to wealth and privilege on the outskirts of New Orleans, its whitewashed columns gleaming in the Louisiana sun like the teeth of a predator. Master Frederick Belmont had built his fortune on sugarcane and the broken backs of over 200 enslaved souls who toiled from dawn until dusk in the sweltering fields. Now in his 70th year, his once commanding presence had diminished, his body ravaged by gout and consumption that kept him confined to his bedchamber most days. The once powerful voice that could silence a room now emerged as little more than a raspy whisper, and his hands that had once delivered brutal punishment now trembled as they reached for the silver bell that would summon his most trusted slave to his side. Solomon, a man of 40 years who had been born on the plantation and served in the main house since childhood, moved with quiet efficiency through the mansion, his eyes carefully downcast in the presence of the white family members, but watchful and intelligent when they believed he wasn't looking. His position as personal attendant to Master Belmont afforded him privileges unheard of for most enslaved people, including literacy, which he had acquired in secret by listening to the master's children's lessons and practicing in the precious moments of solitude he could steal away. Emmeline Belmont, the master's second wife of just 3 years, was a vision of Southern beauty at 26 years of age, with golden curls that cascaded down her back and blue eyes that could charm or chill depending on her purpose. She had arrived at the plantation as a penniless distant cousin of Frederick's first wife, taken in as an act of charity after her family lost everything in a series of bad investments. With calculated patience, she had made herself indispensable to the grieving widower, offering comfort that gradually transformed into companionship and finally culminated in a marriage that shocked New Orleans society. The whispers behind lace fans at social gatherings suggested that the young bride had aspirations beyond being the caretaker of an elderly husband, and her coldness toward his 3 grown children from his first marriage did little to dispel such rumors. While she played the role of devoted wife in public, in private her true nature emerged in the casual cruelty she inflicted upon the house slaves and the calculating glances she cast toward the financial ledgers when she thought no one was watching. The tension in the household reached a breaking point when Master Belmont fell seriously ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. The doctor was summoned from the city, his buggy wheels splashing through the muddy roads as Solomon stood vigilant in the rain, lantern held high to guide the physician to the main house. As the doctor emerged from the master's chambers after a thorough examination, his expression grave, he motioned for the family to join him in the drawing room. The master's 3 children, all of whom had traveled from their own homes upon news of their father's illness, gathered alongside Emmeline as the doctor delivered his prognosis. The old man would likely not survive the month, he informed them, and it would be prudent to ensure his affairs were in order. Solomon, positioned in the shadows as he always was during family discussions, observed the fleeting expression of satisfaction that crossed Emmeline's features before she composed herself into a mask of grief appropriate for a devoted wife. The doctor recommended that someone should remain with the master at all times, and it was decided that Solomon would take the night shift while family members would rotate during daylight hours. This arrangement allowed Solomon unprecedented access to private family conversations, as many forgot his presence or underestimated his understanding as he moved silently through his duties. That evening, as Solomon arranged the master's pillows and prepared his medicinal tea, Frederick Belmont motioned for him to come closer. In a voice barely audible, he confessed a terrible suspicion that had been growing in his mind. He believed Emmeline had married him only for his fortune, and now wished for his death to claim her inheritance. She had been caught twice adjusting his medication, claiming mistakes, but leaving the old man increasingly suspicious. With trembling fingers, he pressed a small key into Solomon's palm, instructing him to unlock the hidden compartment in his desk once everyone was asleep. There he would find the master's true will and testament, one that differed significantly from the document his lawyer held. This secret will, drafted just weeks earlier with the help of a different attorney who had visited under the guise of a social call, contained provisions that would ensure Emmeline would not control the entirety of his vast estate as she expected. Solomon was instructed to keep this document safe until after the master's death, and then deliver it to Judge William Crawford, an old friend of the family who would ensure its proper execution. The weight of this request settled on Solomon's shoulders like the heaviest of burdens, for discovery would mean certain death, but compliance might offer opportunities he had never dared to dream possible. For Solomon, the request presented both unimaginable danger and the faintest glimmer of hope. Over the years of intimate service to his master, he had been promised that provisions would be made for him in old age, perhaps even the precious gift of freedom that remained just beyond reach for so many. The master had even hinted that Solomon's 9-year-old daughter, Lily, who showed remarkable intelligence despite being confined to work in the kitchens, might be granted educational opportunities typically denied to enslaved children. These promises, however vague, had kept Solomon loyal through years of servitude, but he had witnessed too many deathbed promises evaporate like morning dew once masters were laid to rest. As he contemplated the risks and potential rewards of honoring this final request, Solomon reflected on the countless times he had been forced to navigate the treacherous waters of plantation politics, where one misstep could result in the lash, the auction block, or worse. The division between those enslaved in the fields and those who served in the house had created a complex hierarchy within the enslaved community, with house slaves often viewed with suspicion by those who endured the brutal physical labor of agricultural work. Solomon had walked this precarious line his entire life, maintaining the trust of his master while avoiding the perception of being a traitor to his own people. That night, with the household finally still and only the occasional cough from the master's chambers disturbing the silence, Solomon retrieved the key from its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard in his small quarters adjacent to the kitchen. Moving with the practiced stealth developed over a lifetime of navigating spaces where his presence was not welcome, he made his way to the master's study. The moonlight filtering through the tall windows cast elongated shadows across the room as he approached the imposing mahogany desk, his heart thundering so loudly in his chest that he feared it might alert the entire household to his forbidden activities. After several tense moments of searching, his fingers discovered the nearly invisible seam that indicated the hidden compartment. The key slipped in smoothly, and with a soft click the secret drawer slid open, revealing a document sealed with wax bearing the Belmont family crest. Solomon quickly secured the will inside his shirt, close to his skin, and replaced the drawer. As he turned to leave, the floorboards in the hallway creaked, freezing him in place as he extinguished his candle and pressed himself against the wall in the darkness. After what seemed an eternity, the sound of retreating footsteps indicated the unknown person had moved on, and Solomon released the breath he had been holding. The document now concealed within his clothing seemed to burn against his skin, a physical reminder of the dangerous game in which he had become an unwilling player. Over the following days, as Master Belmont's condition deteriorated rapidly, Solomon noticed Emmeline spending unusual amounts of time in the company of the family lawyer, Bartholomew Jenkins, a corpulent man whose beady eyes seemed perpetually calculating the value of everything and everyone around him. Their hushed conversations would abruptly cease whenever anyone approached, and on more than one occasion, Solomon observed Emmeline slipping folded papers to the lawyer during brief moments when they believed themselves unobserved. The master's children, concerned primarily with their own inheritance and the management transition of the plantation, paid little attention to these interactions, their focus divided between their father's declining health and the business matters that would soon fall to them. Solomon, however, recognized the machinations of power and deception unfolding before him, having witnessed similar scenes throughout his years of invisible service. One afternoon, as he delivered tea to Emmeline's private sitting room, he overheard a fragment of conversation that confirmed his worst suspicions. The lawyer was assuring Emmeline that once her husband passed, the will would ensure she maintained control of the plantation, including the authority to sell any assets she deemed unnecessary, a thinly veiled reference to the human property that included Solomon and his daughter. The understanding that both his promised freedom and his daughter's future hung in the balance solidified Solomon's resolve to honor his master's final request, regardless of the danger. As if sensing her plans might be threatened, Emmeline began watching Solomon with increasing suspicion, questioning his movements and assigning him tasks that would keep him occupied away from the master's bedside. Solomon maintained his carefully crafted demeanor of subservience while strategizing how he would deliver the document to Judge Crawford when the time came. The solution presented itself unexpectedly when he learned that one of the field slaves, a man named Isaiah with whom he shared a distant cousin, had been selected to deliver a shipment of sugar to a warehouse near the courthouse in 3 days' time. During the brief moments when they could speak without being overheard, Solomon entrusted Isaiah with the general outlines of his plan, careful to withhold specific details that might endanger his fellow slave if he were questioned. Isaiah agreed to create a diversion at the appropriate time that would allow Solomon to slip away from the plantation unnoticed, though both men understood the severe punishment that would follow if their conspiracy were discovered. The weight of this alliance was not lost on either man, as betrayal among slaves was often born of desperation rather than malice, with overseers expert at playing individuals against one another through promises of better treatment or threats of increased brutality. The night before their plan was to be executed, Master Frederick Belmont breathed his last, his papery hand clutching Solomon's as he extracted a final promise that his true wishes would be honored. The household erupted into a carefully choreographed performance of grief, with Emmeline at the center, her eyes dry despite the handkerchief she periodically pressed to them for the benefit of visitors offering condolences. The master's body was prepared for burial, and the plantation activities temporarily suspended as was customary when the owner passed. Solomon used the disruption in routine to finalize the details of his mission, knowing that the reading of the official will would take place immediately following the funeral scheduled for the next afternoon. If he failed to deliver the true will before then, Emmeline's version would stand unchallenged, and all that had been promised to him would be lost. That night, as the household finally settled into uneasy sleep, Solomon retrieved the hidden document from beneath a loose brick in the smokehouse where he had concealed it and prepared for what would be either his salvation or his destruction. The following morning dawned gray and humid, the air hanging heavy as the funeral procession departed for the family cemetery on the far side of the plantation. Solomon had been instructed to remain behind to prepare the house for the gathering that would follow the service, providing him the perfect opportunity to implement his plan. As the last mourner disappeared around the bend in the road, he quickly changed from his servant's attire into clothing he had carefully assembled over several weeks, pieces that would allow him to move through the city without immediately being identified as a slave away from his master. The journey to New Orleans would take him nearly 2 hours on foot, requiring him to navigate not only the physical distance, but also the numerous patrols that monitored the roads for slaves traveling without proper documentation. The forged pass he carried, created from careful study of legitimate papers he had glimpsed over the years, might withstand cursory inspection, but would crumble under serious scrutiny. Every step away from the plantation carried both the promise of fulfilling his duty to his dead master and the threat of capture and punishment should his deception be discovered. Meanwhile, at the Belmont family cemetery, Emmeline stood beside the open grave, her black veil obscuring the triumph in her eyes as she watched the coffin being lowered into the ground. Beside her, the family lawyer clutched the official will, prepared to read it upon their return to the house and set in motion Emmeline's carefully orchestrated seizure of control. The adult children of Frederick Belmont, their relationships with their father complicated by years of emotional distance, showed more genuine grief than their stepmother, though their concerns about their inheritance were never far from the surface of their thoughts. As the minister intoned the final prayers, a commotion erupted from the direction of the sugarcane fields, where smoke began to rise ominously against the gray sky. Shouts of fire sent the plantation overseer and several slaves running toward the processing barn, creating precisely the diversion Solomon and Isaiah had planned, though on a larger scale than Solomon had anticipated. In the chaos that followed, no one noticed the absence of the master's personal servant, his path to New Orleans now cleared of immediate obstacles as attention focused on saving the valuable sugar crop. The streets of New Orleans presented their own dangers as Solomon navigated the bustling port city, where free people of color moved alongside slaves on errands, and white citizens of varying social classes conducted their business. He kept his eyes downcast, his posture submissive, the document that could change everything securely hidden within his clothing. The address Judge Crawford had provided led him to a stately home in the Garden District, where he was initially turned away at the service entrance by a skeptical house slave. Only his insistence that he carried an urgent message regarding Frederick Belmont secured him reluctant admission to wait in the kitchen while the judge was notified of his presence. Hours seemed to pass as Solomon sat rigid with anxiety, aware that his absence from the plantation would surely have been discovered by now, with search parties likely dispatched to recover the runaway property. When Judge Crawford finally appeared, his expression betrayed surprise at being confronted with a slave rather than a messenger from the Belmont family, but something in Solomon's demeanor convinced him to hear the man out. As Solomon carefully extracted the document and explained the circumstances under which it had been entrusted to him, the judge's initial suspicion gave way to grim understanding. He broke the seal and reviewed the contents, his eyebrows rising incrementally as he absorbed the implications of what Frederick Belmont had set in motion before his death. Back at the plantation, the fire had been contained before causing catastrophic damage, and the funeral party had returned to the main house, where Emmeline instructed the lawyer to proceed with reading the will, despite Solomon's conspicuous absence. The document, as she had ensured through careful manipulation, named her as the primary beneficiary of the estate, with limited provisions for the children, and no mention of manumission for any slaves. As the lawyer concluded the reading, a commotion at the front door interrupted the smug satisfaction settling over Emmeline's features. Judge Crawford entered the parlor without waiting to be announced, Solomon following several paces behind, his eyes fixed on the floor but his posture reflecting a quiet dignity that had not been present before. The judge announced to the assembled family that he had in his possession the true last will and testament of Frederick Belmont, properly executed and witnessed just 2 weeks before his death. The blood drained from Emmeline's face as the judge began to read the document, which revealed the extent of her husband's awareness of her manipulations and his determination to thwart them even from the grave. The true will divided the plantation operations among his children, allocated only a modest yearly allowance to Emmeline that would cease should she remarry, and most shocking of all, granted freedom to Solomon and his daughter, along with a small but significant parcel of land on the edge of the property, and a sum of money that would allow them to establish themselves as free persons. The explosion of rage from Emmeline shattered the stunned silence that followed the judge's reading. She lunged toward Solomon, fingernails extended like claws as she shrieked accusations of theft and deception, requiring the intervention of the master's eldest son to restrain her. In her fury, she revealed more than she intended, confirming the suspicions that she had been slowly poisoning her husband to accelerate her inheritance and had planned to sell most of the slaves, including Solomon and his daughter, to finance the lavish lifestyle she had anticipated enjoying as a wealthy widow. The confession, witnessed by the family lawyer and Judge Crawford, sealed her fate. The judge informed her that given the evidence of her crimes, she faced not only the loss of her expected inheritance, but potential criminal charges that could result in imprisonment. The transformation of the beautiful young widow from confident schemer to desperate prisoner happened with breathtaking speed, her carefully constructed future disintegrating before her eyes as the consequences of her betrayal materialized with irrevocable finality. For Solomon, the outcome represented a twist he could never have anticipated when he first agreed to safeguard his master's true will. Not only had he secured his own freedom and that of his beloved daughter, but he had also exposed the woman who would have condemned them to separation and continued bondage. The small parcel of land, while modest compared to the vast Belmont plantation, represented an opportunity unimaginable to most enslaved people, a chance to build a life determined by his own choices rather than the whims of an owner. As Judge Crawford completed the legal formalities that would transform Solomon from property to citizen, the former slave reflected on the complex web of loyalty, betrayal, and justice that had delivered him to this moment. His master, for all his participation in the brutal system of slavery, had in his final act acknowledged Solomon's humanity and right to self-determination in a way that few of his contemporaries would have considered. The inheritance, both material and symbolic, represented a rare instance of the moral ledger being balanced, however partially, in a society built on profound injustice. In the weeks that followed, as Solomon established his daughter in their new home and began to navigate the precarious status of a newly freed black man in the antebellum South, word of Emmeline's downfall spread throughout the region. She was eventually transported to a women's prison in the North, her beauty faded by the harsh realities of incarceration, and her name becoming synonymous with the dangers of unbridled ambition and betrayal. The story became a cautionary tale told in hushed voices in drawing rooms across New Orleans, a reminder that even the most carefully orchestrated deceptions could unravel through the actions of those deemed insignificant. For the enslaved community, the tale carried different lessons about the possibility, however rare, of justice penetrating the seemingly impenetrable barriers of race and status that structured their world. Solomon, once invisible in his service, had become the instrument through which truth had prevailed, transforming not only his own destiny but altering the trajectory of an entire plantation's legacy. The betrayal Emmeline had planned for her husband had instead become the vehicle of her own undoing, while the loyalty Solomon had maintained despite every incentive to prioritize self-preservation had yielded rewards beyond imagination. The document that had burned against his skin during that dangerous journey to New Orleans had indeed contained fire, but rather than consuming him, It had forged a path to a future previously visible only in his most secret dreams. The story of Solomon and Emmeline reminds us that betrayal often reveals character more clearly than loyalty, exposing the true nature of individuals when they believe themselves unobserved or unaccountable. In the moral crucible of human bondage, where normal ethical considerations were systematically perverted to maintain an inhuman system, rare moments of justice shine with particular brightness, precisely because they were so exceptional. Today, as we confront our own moments of choice between expedience and principle, between self-interest and larger responsibility, we might remember Solomon's dangerous journey, understanding that the path of integrity rarely offers guarantees, but carries its own form of power. The inheritance Solomon received transcended material value, representing recognition of his essential humanity in a system designed to deny it, an acknowledgement that even within the most corrupted structures, individual moral choice retains transformative potential. If his story touches something in your own experience, perhaps you too have witnessed how betrayal can sometimes lead to unexpected justice, how loyalty maintained against all rational calculation can yield rewards impossible to foresee in the moment of decision. We invite you to subscribe to our channel for more carefully researched stories that illuminate these hidden corners of our shared history, narratives that help us understand not only our past, but the echoes that continue to shape our present. By joining this community of seekers, you become part of a collective effort to honor memories long suppressed and to recognize the full humanity of those whose stories have been systematically erased from our common account. Click subscribe to continue this journey of discovery together.